Hello, night seekers, and welcome to Midnight Scary Storyteller, a place where forgotten tales and gentle voices guide you softly into sleep, wrapped in mystery and shadow. Before tonight's story begins, don't forget to subscribe and tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below. I always love seeing where these midnight stories find their way. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's drift together into the unknown. My mom and dad had something happen years ago while they were driving through Kentucky, and even though I was not there for it, the story has always stuck with me because of how strange and simple it is. It was not some long, haunted house story with doors opening by themselves or voices in the dark. It was just a drive on a back road, an old Bronco, my parents, my older sister as a baby, and a glowing green ball in the woods that seemed to follow them for nearly 20 minutes. They were driving somewhere between Louisville and Somerset, Kentucky. Anyone who knows that part of the state, or really any rural stretch like that, knows how quickly the roads can start to feel lonely once you get away from the busier areas. You can go from normal traffic in towns to long, winding roads with woods on both sides. At night, or even in the evening, those roads can feel like they belong to another world. The trees crowd in close, the curves keep you from seeing too far ahead, and every light in the distance catches your attention because there are not many of them. My parents were in an old Bronco at the time. My older sister was with them too, but she was still an infant, not even a year old yet. She was in the back seat, too young to have any memory of what happened. So it was just my mom and dad who saw it and carried the memory afterward. They were driving along this long, windy back road through the woods when they noticed something off to the side. In the trees, maybe 50 feet away from the road, there was a glowing green ball. It was hovering. That alone would have been strange enough. A green light in the woods is not something you expect to see, especially not something shaped like a ball hanging there in the air. It was not a porch light. It was not a flashlight. It was not headlights from another vehicle cutting through the trees. It was a distinct glowing green sphere, floating near the road, keeping pace with the Bronco as they drove. At first, I imagined they tried to make sense of it the way anyone would. Maybe it was something reflective. Maybe it was a light from a house or a piece of equipment somewhere behind the trees. Maybe it was another car on some hidden road running parallel to them. Maybe it was a trick of the glass, or the headlights, or the way the Bronco was moving through the curves. Your brain does not want to jump straight to the impossible. It wants the normal answer first. But the longer they watched it, the less normal it became. The green ball was not just sitting in the woods, it was following them. My dad would slow down, and the glowing ball would slow down too. He would speed up, and it would speed up. He stopped the Bronco, and the light stopped with him. That detail has always been the hardest part to explain. A fixed light cannot do that. A reflection cannot usually keep pace in that way, especially on a winding back road with trees between you and whatever might be causing it. If it had been another vehicle, there should have been some sign of a road, headlights, engine sound, or movement that made sense. But this was just a green ball hovering in the woods, matching the Bronco's speed like it knew they were watching. My dad was fascinated by it. That sounds exactly like the kind of thing some people would do. Instead of driving away as fast as possible, he wanted to know what it was. He wanted to stop, get out, and go look. Maybe he thought there had to be some explanation if he could just get close enough. Maybe curiosity overpowered fear. Maybe he did not feel threatened by it at first. Whatever the reason, he was ready to investigate. My mom was not. She begged him not to get out. She pleaded with him to keep driving. And honestly, I understand her completely. They had an infant in the back seat. This was not two adults on some little adventure where the worst thing that could happen was they scare themselves and laugh about it later. Their baby was with them. They were on a dark, winding road in the woods with something glowing green hovering 50 feet away and following their car in a way that did not make sense. Getting out to walk toward it would have meant leaving the safety of the vehicle and moving closer to something they could not identify. My mom wanted no part of that. She kept reminding him that their baby was in the back. That changed everything. When you have a child with you, curiosity becomes dangerous. You cannot take the same risks. You cannot wander into the woods after a strange light because you want an answer. You have to think about the small person who depends on you. My dad may have wanted to solve the mystery, but my mom was thinking like a mother, and she wanted him to stay in the Bronco and keep going. So they kept driving, and the green ball kept following. For about 20 minutes. That is another detail that makes the story so unsettling. This was not a quick flash of light seen for 2 seconds and then remembered as something bigger. 20 minutes is a long time when something impossible is moving along beside you. Long enough to test it. Long enough to slow down, speed up, and stop. Long enough for fear to build. Long enough for both people in the front seat to understand they were seeing the same thing, and that it was not behaving like any normal light they knew. I try to imagine what those 20 minutes felt like. The old Bronco moving along the dark, winding Kentucky road. The trees sliding by outside the windows. The baby in the back seat, too young to know anything was wrong. My dad glancing toward the woods, trying to understand the green glow. My mom watching it too, probably getting more nervous every time it matched their movement. The ball hovering there, always about the same distance away, never revealing what it was, never getting close enough to identify, but never falling behind either. There is something deeply uncomfortable about being followed by something that does not have a clear shape beyond light. If a car follows you, you at least know what it is. If an animal runs beside the road, you can explain it. If a person appears in the trees, terrifying as that would be, your mind can give it a category. But a floating green ball does not fit into any safe category. It is just there, bright and silent, moving with purpose. And it seemed to respond to them. That is what makes it feel different from a random natural phenomenon. My dad slowed down, and it slowed down. He sped up, and it sped up. He stopped, and it stopped. That makes it sound aware. Maybe it was not. Maybe there is some optical explanation that could make a light appear to match a car's movement. Maybe it was a reflection from the Bronco itself, though I have never heard an explanation that makes that fully satisfying. But to my parents, in that moment, it seemed like the thing was following them deliberately. Then, after around 20 minutes, it vanished. Just gone. No explosion of light, no sound, no object falling, no vehicle turning away, no house appearing through the trees. It simply disappeared, and the road became normal again. I think that is almost worse than if it had done something dramatic. If it had flown away into the sky, maybe they could have called it some kind of craft or drone. Though this was long before drones were common. If it had dropped into the woods, maybe they could have looked for where it landed. If it had turned into a driveway, maybe it would have been a real person with a light. But it vanished without giving them anything to work with. The thing that had followed them for miles was just no longer there. And that was the end of it. No explanation ever came. Over the years, I am sure every possible normal answer has been considered. Could it have been a reflection in the window? Maybe some light inside the Bronco bouncing off glass and appearing outside? But then why did both of them see it in the woods? And why did it seem to hover 50 feet away? Could it have been another vehicle on a parallel road? Maybe. But on a winding back road through woods, the movement would not line up so perfectly, and there would likely have been breaks in the trees, engine noise, or some sign of a road. Could it have been swamp gas or some kind of natural light? People mention things like that, but a glowing ball matching a car's speed for 20 minutes is not easy to explain that way. Could it have been ball lightning? Maybe some people would suggest that, but ball lightning is rare, short-lived, and not something you expect to calmly hover along through the woods beside a moving vehicle, stopping and starting when the driver does. Could it have been a prank? That also seems unlikely. Someone would have had to be in the woods at night with a green glowing object, somehow keeping pace through trees, and brush alongside a vehicle on a winding road for 20 minutes without being seen. None of those answers feel right. And maybe there is an explanation nobody has thought of. There probably are strange lighting effects that can happen on dark roads. There are things the eye can misread. There are reflections, distant lights, weird angles, and all kinds of environmental factors that can trick people. I understand that, but two adults watched it for 20 minutes, while one of them actively tested it by changing speed and stopping. That makes it much harder to dismiss as a quick mistake. What I find interesting is how different my parents' reactions were. My dad wanted to get out and investigate. My mom wanted him to stay in the car and protect the baby. Both reactions make sense. Curiosity and caution are both human. But I think my mom was right. Whatever that thing was, going into the woods after it would have been a bad idea. Maybe it was harmless. Maybe it was nothing. But when something unknown follows your vehicle on a dark back road, and you have an infant in the back seat, you do not owe it your attention. You leave. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my dad had gotten out. Would the green ball have stayed where it was? Would it have moved away? Would it have come closer? Would he have found some ordinary object or person holding a light? Or would he have walked into the woods and found nothing at all, while my mom sat in the Bronco with the baby, watching the darkness around him? That thought alone makes me glad she stopped him. There is a reason stories like this stay in families. They are small enough to be told at gatherings, but strange enough that no one forgets them. A glowing green ball in the woods, following a car between Louisville and Somerset, stopping when the car stopped, speeding up when the car sped up, then disappearing after 20 minutes. It is simple, it is direct, and it does not have an ending that explains anything. My parents never found out what it was. My sister was too little to remember it. And the road, wherever exactly it happened, probably looks perfectly ordinary to anyone driving it now. But I still think about my mom and dad in that old Bronco, moving through the dark Kentucky woods with their baby in the back seat, while something green and glowing hovered among the trees and kept pace with them like it had chosen their vehicle to follow. Maybe it was a strange reflection. Maybe it was some natural phenomenon. Maybe it was something human that they never identified. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something that lives in the quiet spaces between towns and only shows itself for a little while before vanishing back into the dark. Whatever it was, I am glad my dad listened to my mom and did not get out of the Bronco. Because some lights in the woods are better left unexplained. I had something happen once that I still have never been able to explain. It was not a long experience, and nothing dramatic happened afterward. But it scared me so badly that it changed the way I lived in that house for years. Even now, when I think about it, I can still remember the exact feeling in my body. The fear did not just pass through me and leave. It stayed. It got into my routine, into my sleep, into the way I moved through the house. For 2 years after that, I would not sleep upstairs, and even going up there during the day made me nervous. We had just moved into the house, so everything still felt unfamiliar. That matters, because a new house can already feel strange before anything creepy happens. You do not know its sounds yet. You do not know which floorboards creak, which doors shift, which pipes make noise, or what the house sounds like when it settles at night. Every little noise feels unknown because you have not lived there long enough to decide what is normal. My bedroom was upstairs, but since we had just moved in, a lot of my stuff was still downstairs. I was not fully settled in yet, and the house did not feel completely like home. That day, my male cousin, who was 11 at the time, had been there with my aunt. They left, and I knew they had left. At least, I thought I did. The house felt normal after that. Quiet in the way a place gets when guests have gone and everyone starts settling back into their own space. I was not expecting anything strange. I was not trying to scare myself. I was just in the house, probably doing ordinary things, still adjusting to living there. Then I heard a voice. It was a deep voice, and it said, "Hey." Just one word. That was all. But it sounded clear enough that I immediately thought someone was there. It was not a creak or a pipe or some vague sound my brain turned into a word. It sounded like a person saying "hey" from another room. The voice was deep, which is why my first thought was my cousin. Since he had just left with my aunt, I assumed maybe they had come back without me realizing. Maybe they forgot something. Maybe I had not heard the door. Maybe he came back inside and was calling to me. That explanation made sense for about 2 seconds. Because when you hear a voice and you have a normal possible answer, your brain grabs onto it. It does not want the scary version to be true. It wants the simple thing. So I thought, okay, maybe my cousin is back. Maybe he is in that room. Maybe he is just messing around or trying to get my attention. I did not panic right away because I thought I knew who it was. So I went to check. I walked into the room where the voice seemed to have come from, expecting to see him there. No one was there. The room was empty. That was the moment everything inside me dropped. There is a specific kind of fear that comes when your explanation disappears. Before I entered the room, the voice had a person attached to it in my mind. It was my cousin. It had to be. But when I got there and saw that nobody was inside, the voice became something else. It became a sound with no body, a person with no person, a call from an empty room. I froze for a second, trying to process it. Then I freaked out. I ran downstairs and told my mom there was someone in the house. I was not calmly explaining a strange noise. I was scared in a way that made me sure there had to be someone there. That is how real the voice had sounded. I was not thinking. Maybe I imagined it. I was thinking, someone is inside this house. My mom believed me enough to react immediately. She did not just laugh it off or tell me to stop being dramatic. We ran outside, hid, and called the police. That part still shows how serious it felt. You do not run outside and hide with your mom unless the fear feels real. We were not playing around. We genuinely thought there might be someone in the house. I remember the panic of being outside, waiting, not knowing if someone was still inside, moving through the rooms. A house feels very different from the outside when you think there may be an intruder in it. The windows look dark. The doors look too quiet. Every second feels like someone could appear. The police came and searched the house. They looked around and found no one. No intruder. No stranger hiding in a closet. No cousin. No aunt. No person upstairs. Nothing. There was no explanation. In some ways, finding no one should have made me feel better, but it did not. It only made the voice harder to understand. If the police had found someone, that would have been terrifying, but at least it would have made sense. I would have known I heard a real person. I would have known there was a reason. But they found nobody, which meant I was left with the same impossible question I had from the beginning. Who said hey? I know people can mishear things. I know houses make sounds. I know when you move into a new place you are more alert and more likely to be startled by ordinary noises. I have told myself all of that over the years. Maybe a pipe made a sound that happened to resemble a voice. Maybe there was noise from outside. Maybe a neighbor called out and the sound traveled strangely. Maybe my cousin's voice was still in my head because he had just left, and my brain turned some random sound into him saying hey. Those explanations are possible, but none of them ever felt right. The voice sounded like it came from inside the house. It sounded close. It sounded directed at me. And it sounded human. That is why it affected me so badly afterward. I could not just move on from it. My bedroom was upstairs, but after that, I could not sleep there. For 2 years, I slept on the couch in the living room. 2 years. That sounds extreme, but fear does not always listen to logic. People can say, nothing happened, the police found no one, it was probably just a sound. But they were not the ones who heard a deep voice call out from an empty room in a house they had just moved into. I could not make myself go back to sleeping upstairs. The upstairs felt unsafe after that. It did not matter that nothing else happened right away. It did not matter that everyone else could walk around like normal. My body remembered the fear. The upstairs was where the voice had come from, and that was enough. At night, the thought of going up there made my chest tighten. I did not want to be alone in those rooms. I did not want to lie in bed wondering if I would hear it again. I did not want to wake up in the dark and feel like someone was standing outside the door. So, I stayed downstairs. The couch in the living room became my bed. It was not comfortable in the way a real bedroom is supposed to be, but it felt safer. Downstairs felt closer to everyone, closer to the exits, closer to light and movement. Upstairs felt separate. It felt like its own part of the house, and after the voice, I wanted nothing to do with it. During the day, I could go upstairs if I had to, but even then, it was hard. I still remember how I would start shaking when I tried to go up there. Not just feeling nervous, but actually shaking. My body would react before I even reached the top. I would force myself to climb the stairs, telling myself I was being ridiculous, telling myself there was nothing there, telling myself it had been one strange sound and nothing more. But fear would still rise in me with every step. The daylight helped, but only a little. There is something humiliating about being that afraid of part of your own house. You know other people will not fully understand. They might think you are exaggerating or being dramatic. They might say, just go upstairs, as if fear is something you can turn off by being told to. But I could not. That one word had taken the upstairs away from me. Hey, that was all it said. One simple word, and yet it was enough to make me sleep on a couch for 2 years. I think the simplicity is part of why it still bothers me. If I had heard screaming, whispering, chanting, or something obviously strange, maybe it would feel like a ghost story. But hey is ordinary. It is casual. It is something someone says when they want your attention. That makes it worse, because it felt personal. It was not just a random noise. It felt like someone was trying to get me to come into the room. And I did. That thought still makes me uncomfortable. I heard the voice and followed it. I walked into the room because I thought my cousin was there. If someone or something had wanted me to come closer, it worked. That may not mean anything, but it is hard not to think about. What if it had been waiting? What if I had gone in at the wrong moment? What if the room had not been empty when I stepped inside? Of course, it was empty. That is the fact. I went in, saw no one, and ran. But sometimes an empty room can be scarier than a room with someone in it. A person gives the fear a shape. An empty room leaves you with nothing but the voice. My mom and I never found out what happened. The police found no one. My cousin and aunt had not come back. No one admitted to calling out. No explanation ever appeared later. It was just this single incident that came out of nowhere and left a mark on me for years. I wish I could say I eventually solved it. I wish there had been a neighbor outside. A radio left on, a toy that made noise, a TV in another room. Something, anything. I would have accepted almost any explanation if it meant I could stop wondering. But there was nothing. Just a deep voice from an empty room in a new house. And then, 2 years of fear. Even now, I can remember the feeling of going upstairs after that, how my body would tense before I reached the top. I remember the way the upstairs seemed too quiet in daylight and impossible at night. I remember sleeping on the couch because the living room felt like the only place I could relax. I remember running outside with my mom and hiding because we were both scared enough to call the police. And I remember that voice. Clear, deep, and close. Hey, I never figured out what happened. Maybe it was a sound that my brain turned into a voice. Maybe it was someone outside and the house carried the sound strangely. Maybe it was something perfectly normal that only seemed terrifying because we had just moved in and the house still felt unfamiliar. Or maybe someone really did speak from that empty room. I do not know. All I know is that I heard it. I went to check. No one was there. And after that night, the upstairs of that house never felt safe to me again. I grew up in an Edwardian house, the kind of old house that always seemed to have more space in it than it should. The ceilings were high. The rooms had that slightly grand feeling older houses can have. And there was a long hallway that ran through the place like a spine. During the day, it was just home. It was familiar, lived in, and normal. But at night, or even in the quiet part of the evening, that same hallway could feel different. Sounds carried strangely through it. A creak from one end could seem to come from somewhere else. A door shifting in its frame could make you pause. Old houses have a way of making you listen, even when you do not want to. My dad was a very talented pianist. Music was part of who he was. He had a room next to the hallway where his piano was kept, and because of that, the sound of piano in our house was not unusual. If I heard someone playing, my first thought was always my dad. That was simply where my mind went, because he was the one who played. The piano room belonged to him in a way, not officially maybe, but emotionally. It was the room where that part of him lived. The piano itself had a strong presence in the house. It was not just another piece of furniture. When you grow up with a musician in the family, certain sounds become part of your childhood. The way fingers move over keys, the soft pause before a song begins, the deep notes that seem to settle in the floorboards, the higher notes that drift through doorways and up the hall. I was used to hearing my dad play, and I knew the general sound of it. I knew the difference between a random note being hit and actual playing. This was not the sound of a key settling or a string making some odd noise. It was music. One evening, when I was about 14, I was walking down the hallway. I remember knowing my dad was not supposed to be home. He was working an afternoon shift that day, and he finished at 10 p.m. That was not a vague guess. I knew his schedule. He was at work. He should not have been anywhere near the piano room. But as I walked down the hallway, I heard the piano playing. At first, it did not scare me. That is what makes the memory so strange. My brain accepted the sound before it questioned it. I heard piano music coming from the room where the piano was kept, and because that was a normal sound in our house, I immediately thought my dad must have come home early. Maybe his shift had changed. Maybe he had been let off sooner than expected. Maybe I had misunderstood the time. There were plenty of ordinary explanations before anything supernatural needed to enter my mind. The sound was clear enough that I did not think I imagined it. It was not a distant vibration or one single accidental note. It was piano playing. It came from the direction of the room next to the hallway, exactly where it should have come from if my dad had been sitting there. I do not remember the exact tune anymore, but I remember the certainty that someone was playing. I walked into the living room where my mum was and said, "I didn't realize Dad had come home early." I said it casually because to me, that was the obvious explanation. I had heard the piano, so Dad must have been home. There was no fear in the question, no suspicion. I was not trying to set up a ghost story. I was only making a normal comment about something I thought had happened, but my mum looked at me and said, "He's still at work." That was the moment everything changed. It is strange how quickly a normal sound can become impossible. 1 second, the piano was comforting because it meant my dad was home. The next second, it became something I did not want to hear. My mind tried to catch up. If Dad was still at work, then who was playing? My mum had not been in that room. I had not been in that room. There was no one else who should have been sitting at the piano, and yet I had heard it. I still remember walking toward the piano room after that. The hallway felt longer than usual. I was 14, old enough to know better than to panic over every strange noise, but young enough that fear could still grab me hard when something did not make sense. The room with the piano was right there, next to the hall, and I knew I had to open the door. Part of me wanted to prove my mum wrong somehow. Maybe Dad had come in quietly, and she had not noticed. Maybe someone else was in there for some reason. Maybe there was a radio on, or the sound had come from outside, or from another room, or from somewhere that would make sense once I looked. But another part of me already knew. I opened the door. The room was completely dark. That image has stayed with me for years. The door opening, the darkness inside, and the sudden absence of the sound. There was no one at the piano, no figures sitting on the bench, no movement, no explanation. Just the piano in the dark room, silent now, waiting like it had never made a sound at all. The feeling I had in that moment is hard to describe. It was not screaming terror. It was more like my stomach dropped and the air around me turned cold. I had been so sure of what I heard. I had heard the piano playing from that room. I had walked to my mum and spoken as if Dad being home was a fact. Then I opened the door and found nothing but darkness. Old houses are already full of echoes. That is what I told myself later. Maybe sound traveled strangely through the house. Maybe someone nearby had music playing, and because of the hallway and the rooms, it somehow sounded like it came from our piano. Maybe a television or radio was on somewhere. Maybe my mind heard a few house noises and shaped them into piano music because I associated that room with my dad. These are the kinds of explanations people reach for when they do not want to sit with the unknown. But none of them ever felt right. The sound had come from the piano room. I knew where it was coming from. I had grown up in that house. I knew how sounds moved through it. I knew the difference between music outside and music inside. I knew the sound of that piano. And I knew my dad was at work. That is the part that unsettled me most. If I had only heard one note, I could have blamed the instrument itself. Old pianos can make small noises, wood shifts. Strings may settle. Maybe something inside changes with temperature, but this was not one note. It was playing. It sounded like a person was there, using the keys, making music. And the person who should have been there was not home. I do not remember anything else happening that night. No doors slammed, no shadow moved across the hallway, no voice called my name. Nothing dramatic followed. In some ways, that made it creepier. The house simply gave me one impossible moment, then went quiet again. It let me hear the piano, let me believe my dad had come home, let my mom tell me he was still at work, and then let me open the door to a dark, empty room. That was all, but it was enough. Because after that, the piano room never felt exactly the same to me. I could still go in there. It was not like I refused to enter forever. But the memory stayed attached to the doorway. Every time I passed that room in the hall, some part of me remembered the sound. I remembered being so sure my dad was inside. I remembered the darkness. I remembered the quiet that came after the door opened. A house with a piano has a special kind of silence when no one is playing. It is not like a room without an instrument. A piano sits there with the possibility of sound inside it. Even when it is quiet, you know what it can do. You know the music it has held. You know the person who usually brings it to life. So when you hear it playing and then find no one there, the silence afterward feels almost alive. I have wondered over the years whether it was connected to the house itself or to my dad in some strange way. He was alive, of course. He was just at work. So it was not like hearing the music of someone who had passed away. That might have made the story fit a more familiar ghost pattern. This was different. It was the sound of a living person's music happening when that living person was nowhere near the instrument. Maybe old houses store things. I do not know if I believe that in a literal way, but sometimes it feels possible. Maybe rooms where certain actions happen over and over again hold on to them. Maybe footsteps repeat in hallways. Maybe voices linger in kitchens. Maybe music stays in a room where someone has played often enough and with enough feeling. Maybe, just for a few seconds, I heard an echo of my dad playing that did not belong to that exact moment. Or maybe someone else was there. That thought is less comforting. A dark room with a silent piano is one thing. A dark room where someone invisible had just been playing is another. I did not feel a clear presence when I opened the door, at least not one I can describe. But I felt the wrongness of it. I felt the gap between what I had heard and what I found. That gap is where the fear lived. My mom's response made it real too. If she had said, yes, he came home, or that was the radio, or I was playing something, the whole thing would have ended there. But she told me Dad was still at work. And she was right. He was not home. The explanation I had built in my mind collapsed in one sentence. I think that is why the memory remains so sharp. It was a simple moment, but it had no satisfying ending. I heard the piano. I assumed my dad was home. My mom said he was not. I opened the piano room door. It was dark and empty. There was nothing else to investigate. No one to blame. No answer waiting in the room. Only the piano. Even now, I can recall the feeling of standing there in the doorway, looking into complete darkness, trying to make my mind accept that the room was empty. I can still remember how strange it felt that the music had stopped, as if whoever or whatever had been playing knew I was coming. Maybe that is not what happened. Maybe the timing was coincidence, but that is how it felt. Like the sound stopped because I opened the door. I know this is not the most dramatic ghost story. Nobody appeared in front of me. Nothing touched me. Nothing followed me down the hall. But sometimes the quiet experiences are the ones that stay with you the longest. A sound you know, a room you know, a person you expect to be there. Then darkness, silence, and the knowledge that the person was miles away at work. That evening in the Edwardian house, I heard my dad's piano playing from the room beside the hallway. I told my mum I had not realized he had come home early. She told me he was still at work. And when I opened the door to the piano room, I found only darkness. Sometimes I genuinely think certain families or towns carry this weird shadow around them. Not in a supernatural curse kind of way, but in the sense that after enough horrible things happen close to you, the world itself starts feeling darker. You stop looking at tragedies as things that only happen on the news or in documentaries. They start feeling personal, tangible. Like death and violence are always a lot closer than people pretend they are. I realized that slowly over the years because of the number of unbelievably disturbing stories somehow connected to people around me. The worst part is that none of these stories even sound real when I try explaining them out loud. They sound like disconnected horror movie plots stitched together randomly. But every single one is attached to an actual person I knew, or someone directly connected to my life. The first one still completely messes with my head whenever I think about it too long. Apparently my aunt murdered her husband by running him over with her car. Not once, 3 times. And the craziest part is that it happened only a couple miles away from where I grew up. For most of my childhood, though, I didn't even know this woman existed. My family wasn't exactly close or emotionally healthy in the first place, so there were relatives nobody really talked about openly. You'd hear vague references occasionally. Certain names would make conversations go quiet. Adults would suddenly change subjects around kids. At the time, I never thought much about it because children assume all families have weird tension they don't understand. Then one day, years later, completely by accident, I ended up meeting her. That's honestly a whole separate nightmare story by itself. I had gone with somebody to visit a house without really knowing who lived there. I remember walking in and immediately getting this strange feeling because everybody inside seemed oddly tense. Not openly hostile exactly, just uncomfortable in this weird, heavy way that made me feel like I'd interrupted something important. At some point during the visit, somebody casually mentioned how the woman living there was related to me. I remember being confused because I had literally never heard of her before. Then later, after we left, someone finally explained why nobody talked about her. Years earlier, she and her husband had gotten into some kind of massive argument while driving. I never learned every detail because family members always told the story differently depending on who was talking, but apparently things escalated violently. At some point, he got out of the car, and she ran him over. Then she backed up and did it again, and then again. Even typing that feels unreal. I remember sitting there afterward trying to mentally picture how angry someone would have to be to do something like that. There's something deeply horrifying about vehicular violence because of how personal and deliberate it feels. A car becomes this giant mechanical weapon, and the act itself takes several conscious choices. Press the gas pedal, hit the person, reverse, do it again. Every step requires intention. That's what disturbed me most, and knowing it happened so close to places I drove past constantly somehow made it even worse. I still sometimes pass roads near where it happened and randomly remember the story. Suddenly, ordinary streets stop feeling ordinary for a few seconds. You realize horrible things happened in places people now casually drive past while listening to music or buying coffee. But somehow, that wasn't even the story that affected me the most emotionally. Last year, my sister's friend was kidnapped and murdered. That sentence still feels wrong to say out loud because he genuinely did not seem like the type of person the world should hurt. Everybody says nice things after someone dies, obviously, but this guy truly was one of the gentlest people I'd ever met. Quiet, kind, soft-spoken. The type of person who remembered small details about other people and actually cared when they talked. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking or involved in dangerous crowds. He was just good. That's honestly what made the whole thing so upsetting. There are some people you subconsciously assume will live long, peaceful lives because cruelty seems fundamentally incompatible with who they are. Then reality reminds you it doesn't work that way. From what I remember, he disappeared suddenly enough that at first people assumed maybe there had been some misunderstanding. Friends started posting online, asking if anybody had heard from him. Family members became increasingly panicked as more time passed. Then, eventually, police got involved publicly, and then everybody already knew deep down where the story was heading. There's a certain tone missing person cases take on after a while that becomes terrifying. The hopeful energy fades. News updates become colder. Friends stop saying, "Hopefully he comes home soon," and start sounding desperate instead. When they finally confirmed he'd been kidnapped and murdered, it honestly shook a lot of people badly. My sister cried for days. I mostly remember this heavy, numb feeling afterward because it seemed so senseless. There are murders where people try mentally attaching explanations to make themselves feel safer. Gang involvement, dangerous lifestyle, bad choices. But this wasn't like that. Sometimes evil just crashes directly into innocent people for no reason anybody can emotionally process. And the details made it worse. Not even graphic details necessarily, just the knowledge that somebody kind and harmless spent their final moments terrified and at the mercy of people capable of unimaginable cruelty. That thought alone can ruin your entire week if you let yourself sit with it too long. The strangest thing about violent death is how it changes ordinary memories afterward. Every photo suddenly feels heavier. Every old conversation becomes important. You replay tiny meaningless moments because your brain desperately wants more of the person now that they're gone. I remember my sister saying something that really stuck with me after his funeral. She said the hardest part was that the world kept moving normally afterward. People still went to work. Traffic still happened. Stores still opened. Meanwhile, somebody good had been brutally erased from existence. That disconnect between personal tragedy and ordinary life feels deeply wrong when you first experience it closely. And then there's the last story, which honestly disturbs me in a completely different way. Back in college, one of my roommates mentioned that his mom used to work with Joyce Carol Vincent. If you don't recognize the name immediately, her story is one of the saddest and most haunting things I've ever heard. She was a woman in England who died alone in her apartment and wasn't discovered for nearly 3 years. 3 years. Think about that for a second. According to the story, nobody realized she was gone. The TV in her apartment apparently kept running for a long time after she died because bills were automatically paid for a while. Mail piled up. Neighbors assumed nothing unusual was happening. And somehow an entire human being disappeared silently enough that the world just continued around her. When my roommate first brought it up, we ended up talking about it late into the night because the idea itself felt almost impossible. How isolated does someone have to become for that to happen? Apparently his mom knew her from work before everything happened. Not extremely closely, but enough to remember her as a real person rather than just a tragic headline. That detail always makes stories hit differently for me. News articles flatten people into events. But hearing somebody say, "Yeah, my mom actually knew her," suddenly makes the person feel real in a painful way. She had coworkers. Conversations, inside jokes probably. Normal routines. Then one day she vanished into silence so completely that years passed before anyone physically found her. Out of all the stories, that one honestly scares me in the most existential way. The murder stories are horrifying because they involve violence and cruelty. But the Joyce Carol Vincent story terrifies me because of loneliness. Because it forces you to confront how invisible people can become, even in crowded modern cities filled with millions of others. I remember laying awake one night after hearing about her, thinking about apartment buildings specifically. Hundreds of people stacked together, separated only by thin walls, and most barely know each other at all. You can live beside somebody for years and know almost nothing about their actual life, whether they're happy, whether they're suffering, whether they're even alive. That realization unsettled me more than I expected. And honestly, when I step back and think about all these stories together, the thing tying them all together isn't just death. It's isolation, an ant whose rage exploded into something monstrous, a kind young man taken violently from people who loved him, a woman disappearing so quietly the world failed to notice for years. All of them make the world feel colder somehow. Like underneath normal life, there's this constant hidden layer of grief and horror most people never see until it suddenly crashes into their own orbit. That's why these stories stay with me so strongly, because none of them feel cinematic or dramatic in the way movies do. They feel real, messy, human. The kind of stories that make you stare at the ceiling late at night, thinking about how fragile normal life actually is. And honestly, sometimes the scariest thing isn't death itself. It's how close it always quietly exists beside everyday life, while most of us pretend not to notice. Years ago, I lived in a ground floor flat with my girlfriend and our 4-year-old son. The place itself already had an eerie atmosphere long before anything actually happened there. It had originally been an old chapel that was later converted into apartments, and a large graveyard still sat directly behind the building. During the daytime, it mostly just looked old and worn down, but at night the place felt completely different. The graveyard stretched out behind the property with crooked headstones, overgrown grass, and ancient trees that blocked out most of the light. Our son's bedroom window faced directly toward it, which already bothered me a little when we first moved in. You'd look out at night and just see rows of dark shapes disappearing into shadows. The building itself carried that strange old silence too. Thick walls, long creaking hallways, pipes making noises at random hours. The kind of place where every sound felt amplified after midnight. Still, life went on normally there for quite a while. My girlfriend and I got used to it eventually. Our son seemed completely unbothered by the graveyard. Honestly, kids adapt to creepy surroundings faster than adults do sometimes. To him, it was just where we lived. Then one morning happened that I still think about years later. It was an ordinary weekday morning at first. I got up early for work like usual while my girlfriend got our son ready for the day. Nothing felt strange. No weird noises during the night. No signs anything had happened outside. I remember making coffee while still half asleep and gathering my things for work. It was one of those mornings where your brain is still running on autopilot. Then I walked toward the front door. Immediately, something felt wrong. At first, I couldn't even fully process what I was seeing because it looked so out of place against the white paint of the inside hallway. There were 2 dark reddish streaks smeared down the inside of our front door. For a second, my brain genuinely refused to identify it properly. Then I realized it was blood, actual blood, fresh enough to still be dark and wet looking. The streaks came directly from the letterbox opening in the door. I remember just standing there frozen staring at it while my stomach dropped. My girlfriend walked over behind me, asking what was wrong, and the second she saw it, she gasped. Nothing prepares you for suddenly finding blood inside your home, especially when you have no idea how it got there. My first thought, honestly, was that somebody had somehow tried reaching through the letterbox during the night. That idea alone terrified me immediately, because our son's bedroom wasn't far from the front entrance. I slowly unlocked and opened the front door, and that's when things became much worse. There was blood everywhere outside, not just a few drops, a huge amount. It was smeared across the outside of the door, splattered along the wall near the entrance, and streaked across the ground outside our flat. It genuinely looked like somebody badly injured had spent time right outside our home during the night. The sight was disturbing enough that my girlfriend immediately grabbed our son and pulled him farther back inside while I stood there staring in shock. We called the police right away. To their credit, they arrived surprisingly fast. I think the amount of blood probably made them assume someone might still be seriously injured nearby. Within a short time, there were officers outside examining the entrance while we tried explaining what we found. Eventually, one of the officers told us what happened. Apparently, sometime during the night, a man had been stabbed further down the road, badly. According to what they pieced together, he had staggered through the area, trying to get help while bleeding heavily. At some point, he reached our flat and attempted to get someone's attention. That explained the blood on the door and the letterbox. He had apparently tried knocking or reaching through the slot while desperately looking for help. Even hearing that made my skin crawl because we had all been asleep inside while this injured stranger was right outside our front door bleeding in the dark. But then the story somehow became even more unsettling. While the police were speaking with us, our 4-year-old son suddenly spoke up from behind us, completely casually. "There was a man at my window last night." The room went silent immediately. I remember every adult turning toward him at once. Kids say strange things constantly, so part of me initially assumed he misunderstood something or maybe dreamed it. But there was something matter-of-fact about the way he said it that instantly made me uneasy. I knelt down and asked him what he meant. He said during the night he woke up and saw a man outside his bedroom window. At that point, every hair on my body stood up, because his bedroom window was on the side of the building facing the graveyard. And suddenly I realized if the injured man had been trying to get help, he may have walked around the entire building during the night, searching for another way to get someone's attention. One of the officers asked to see the window immediately, so I went outside with them and walked around the side of the flat toward my son's bedroom. I honestly hoped we'd find nothing. I wanted it to be a child's imagination. But the second we reached the window, my stomach dropped again. There was blood on the glass. More blood smeared across the windowsill too. Not a little either. Enough to clearly show someone had been there pressing against the window during the night. I remember just staring at it, trying to imagine the scene. My 4-year-old son asleep inside his bedroom while outside, in complete darkness beside the graveyard, a badly wounded stranger stood at his window covered in blood trying to get help. That image has genuinely never left me. The police eventually confirmed the man survived, thankfully. From what we were told later, he managed to get help elsewhere afterward and was taken to the hospital. But for a long time after that, none of us slept properly in that flat, especially not me. Because once you know somebody was outside your child's bedroom window in the middle of the night, your sense of safety disappears completely. Every noise afterwards sounded suspicious. Every creak outside made me sit upright in bed listening. And honestly, the graveyard behind the building suddenly felt much creepier than it ever had before. Not because of ghosts or paranormal stuff, but because reality turned out to be far scarier. I kept imagining the injured man stumbling through the dark between gravestones and apartment walls, desperately searching for help, while we all slept only a few feet away. And what really bothered me most was realizing how close we came to something much worse without even knowing it. What if the attacker had followed him? What if the injured man collapsed right outside our son's room? What if our child had opened the window? What if whoever stabbed him came looking for him afterward? Your mind starts building endless possibilities after events like that. For weeks afterward, my son occasionally mentioned the bloody man at the window. In that casual way, children sometimes discuss terrifying things without fully understanding them. Meanwhile, every time he mentioned it, I felt cold all over again. Even years later, I can still clearly picture that morning. The dark streaks running down the inside of our front door. The blood outside the entrance. The police standing in our hallway, and then walking around the building to find bloody handprints beneath my son's bedroom window facing the graveyard. Honestly, I think what scared me most was how silently the entire thing happened. An injured man bleeding heavily moved around our home during the night while we slept peacefully inside, completely unaware. And only the child in the house ever actually saw him. When I was around 12 years old, my father took me and one of my friends to Atlantic City for a star search competition. At the time, it felt huge to me, like the most exciting thing that had ever happened in my life. I remember feeling grown up because we were traveling for a performance, staying in a hotel, and being surrounded by other talented kids and families who had come there for the same reason. But looking back honestly, even though I was technically 12, emotionally I was still very much a child. I was still secretly playing with dolls at that age. I hid it because I knew kids around me were starting to act older, cooler, more mature. But inside I was still caught somewhere between childhood and becoming a teenager. One minute I wanted to feel independent and grown up, and the next minute I still had bursts of goofy childlike energy that I could not control. That trip brought out that side of me completely. My entire troupe was staying at the same hotel that had apparently been recommended for the competition. I remember the place feeling enormous compared to anything I was used to. Long carpeted hallways, elevators constantly opening and closing, people coming and going at all hours. Hotels always felt exciting to me as a kid because they seemed temporary and strange, like tiny little worlds where nobody really knew each other. And honestly, that is part of what makes the memories so frightening now, because hotels are full of strangers. At the time, though, I was not thinking about danger at all. I was excited, hyper, probably overtired from traveling and rehearsals. I also had a habit of giving my dad a hard time sometimes just because I thought it was funny. Looking back, I was probably exhausting. I loved teasing him, running off dramatically, acting silly for attention, all the normal annoying kid behavior. At some point that night, I got a burst of energy while we were back at the hotel room. I was in my pajamas, completely relaxed and comfortable, and for whatever reason, I suddenly decided it would be hilarious to run out into the hallway. I honestly cannot remember what started it. Maybe I was joking around with my friend. Maybe my dad had told me to settle down and I decided to be dramatic about it. I just remember opening the hotel room door and sprinting down the hallway. I think I might have even been singing while I ran. That is the part that always hits me hardest now. How innocent and childish I still was in that moment. I was not acting cautious or aware of my surroundings. I was just a loud, energetic little girl in pajamas running through a hotel corridor because life still felt completely safe to me. Then 2 men opened their hotel room door. I remember them looking older, probably somewhere in their 30s or 40s. At the time, adults all looked old to me, so I cannot be exact. But they were definitely grown men. And instead of reacting annoyed that a kid was running through the hallway, they smiled and motioned for me to come inside their room. That memory still makes my stomach drop. At 12 years old, I did not immediately understand the danger. That is the terrifying thing about being a child. You have instincts sometimes, but you do not fully understand why certain situations are unsafe. To me, in that split second, it mostly just felt confusing. I remember them acting welcoming, friendly, almost casual, like they expected me to walk right over. And horrifyingly, I probably would have. That is what scares me most now looking back. I was genuinely starting to move toward them because my brain had not yet processed that something was wrong. Children are raised to trust adults automatically in many situations. If someone smiles and acts nice, kids often assume they are safe. I truly think I was only seconds away from stepping into that hotel room. Then my father appeared. He had apparently run after me the second I bolted from the room. I still remember the way he came around the corner suddenly and firmly told me, "Come with me." His tone changed everything instantly. The second the men saw my father there, their entire attitude changed too. According to my memory, they looked startled or nervous immediately. Then they quickly slammed the hotel room door shut. That detail has always stayed with me, because innocent adults do not usually panic and slam doors the moment a parent appears looking for their child. Even as a kid, I think part of me understood that afterward. At the time, though, my dad mostly just seemed angry and serious. I do not think he fully explained the danger to me in that exact moment. He probably just grabbed me and took me back to the room while I sat there confused and embarrassed. But as I got older, the memory transformed completely in my mind. Because now I understand what almost happened, and honestly, it terrifies me. I think about how vulnerable I looked from their perspective. A little girl alone in pajamas running through a hotel hallway without supervision. Easy to trick, easy to lure over with a smile or friendly voice. They probably assumed I was unsupervised for at least a few moments. And they acted immediately. That realization is deeply disturbing now as an adult because it shows how quickly dangerous people notice opportunities. It still chills me how close I came to walking toward them willingly. No force, no screaming, no dramatic kidnapping scene like people imagine in movies. Just 2 strange men smiling and motioning for a child to come inside, and a child almost doing it. If my father had reacted slower, if he assumed I was safe for another minute, if he had not immediately chased after me, I honestly do not know what could have happened. That is the kind of thought that stays with you forever once you are old enough to understand it properly. The strange thing is my relationship with my father was complicated in a lot of ways. He was not an easy man. There were many reasons growing up with him could be difficult, and our relationship definitely had painful parts over the years. But whenever I think about this memory, one thing becomes crystal clear to me. He protected me that night, without hesitation, without delay. The second he saw danger, he acted. And honestly, I believe that moment may have saved me from something terrible. That is probably why the memory became emotional for me as I got older. Because sometimes people can fail you in many ways while still showing up exactly when it matters most. Human relationships are messy like that. Someone does not have to be perfect to save your life. I think about those men sometimes still. Who were they? What did they want? Were they simply creepy opportunists taking advantage of a child wandering alone? Or was it something far worse? I will never know. and maybe it is better that way. But I do know this. The speed at which they backed off the second an adult male appeared tells me my instincts about the situation now are probably correct. They were not harmless. The older I get, the more I understand how frighteningly small the gap was between normal life and potential tragedy in that moment. One child running down a hotel hallway, one open door, one bad decision made without understanding the danger, and then suddenly a father appears around the corner just in time. Honestly, whenever I think back on that memory now, I do not remember the competition itself very clearly anymore. I remember the hallway. I remember the men motioning me over. And I remember my father's voice cutting through the moment before I could take another step toward their door. The house we lived in from the late 90s into the early 2000s was in Southern California, and it was the kind of place that looked normal enough from the outside. It was not some ruined old mansion at the end of a road. It was not the kind of house people would point at and immediately call haunted. It was just a house, the place where we lived, kept our things, slept, cooked, worked, argued, relaxed, and tried to build a normal life. But that house had something wrong with it. I do not know what it was, and even after all these years, I still cannot explain most of what happened there. At first, the strange things were small enough that we tried to ignore them. That is usually how it starts. A noise here, a door there, a thing out of place. You tell yourself old houses make sounds, or the wind caught something. Or maybe you forgot what you did earlier. No one wants to jump straight to the idea that the house they live in has something in it. You want your home to feel safe, so you give the house every possible excuse. But the excuses got harder to keep using. Locked doors would open by themselves and then slam shut. Not doors that were just slightly pushed closed, not doors that had loose latches or were left half open. Locked doors. They would open, then slam with enough force to make the sound echo through the house. At first, we tried to blame drafts. Southern California has earthquakes, shifting foundations, temperature changes, and all kinds of little things that can make a house settle or move. But a locked door opening and slamming shut is not the same as a creak in the wall. After it happens more than once, it starts to feel less like a house problem and more like something trying to get your attention. We also heard footsteps on the raised foundation part of the house. Anyone who has lived in a house with that kind of construction knows the sound of someone walking across it. It is not the same as random settling. Footsteps have a rhythm, a weight, a movement from one place to another. We would hear them when no one was there, and that was one of the things that made the house feel occupied even when it should have been empty. A single creak can be explained. Repeated footsteps moving across part of the house are harder to dismiss. Then, there were the closets. Sometimes the clothes hanging inside would sway like someone had brushed against them. Not just one sleeve moving slightly because air had shifted, but clothes moving as if a body had passed through the closet space and disturbed them. That sight always made my stomach tighten. There is something deeply wrong about seeing the signs of movement without seeing the thing that moved. The clothes would swing gently, quietly, like they were settling after someone had just walked through them. But there was never anyone there. And then there were the party sounds. That may have been one of the strangest recurring things in the house. Multiple times, we heard what sounded like a fancy party downstairs. It was not loud enough to be clear conversation, but it had a very specific feeling to it. Low murmuring voices, the soft rise and fall of people talking, and the clinking of glasses. It sounded like people gathered together downstairs in the middle of some social event, speaking quietly, moving around, maybe drinking from nice glassware. It did not sound like a television. It did not sound like neighbors. It sounded like the house was full of guests we could not see. The first time you hear something like that, you think there must be a source. Maybe a TV was left on. Maybe the neighbors were having people over and the sound carried strangely. Maybe someone outside was talking. But when it happens more than once, and the sound seems to come from inside your own house, from downstairs where nobody should be, it gets under your skin. It makes you stop at the top of the stairs and listen, trying to decide whether you are brave enough to go down and see. Most of the time, there was nothing to find, just silence. That became one of the patterns of the house. It would make itself known, then go quiet by the time you tried to catch it. A sound, a movement, a door, footsteps, voices, then nothing. Empty rooms, still air, normal furniture. It made you feel ridiculous for being scared, but only after it had already scared you. We had both dogs and cats at the time, and the animals made the house feel even stranger. Animals notice things. I do not care what anyone says. They know when something is off. We had 2 dogs and 2 cats, and because of them, I kept the cat's gravity feeder on the kitchen counter in a corner. I did that on purpose, mostly to keep it away from the dogs, and in a spot where it would not get knocked over easily. It was not balanced on the edge. It was not in the middle of a busy surface. It was in a corner on the counter where it should have stayed. One night, I was upstairs in bed reading. My ex was at work, and I was waiting for them to get home. It was one of those quiet nights where the house feels too still, but you try not to think about it. I had the animals with me, which normally made me feel better. Both dogs and both cats were in bed with me. That detail matters, because it ruled out the easiest explanation for what happened next. While I was reading, I heard a loud sound from downstairs. It sounded like someone had dropped something heavy. The noise was sudden and strong enough that the whole mood in the bedroom changed instantly. The dogs perked up and started barking, but they did not jump off the bed and run downstairs the way they might have if they thought it was a normal intruder or animal. Instead, they stayed on the bed with their hackles raised. That was what bothered me. They were alert. They were scared or defensive. But they did not want to go toward the sound. The cats reacted too. They freaked out and ran behind the bed, hiding like something had badly startled them. Cats can react to loud noises, of course. But again, all the animals were upstairs with me. None of them had been in the kitchen. None of them could have knocked anything over. Whatever made that sound downstairs did not come from them. I got up and went to check. I still remember that walk downstairs. The house felt different after a loud sound like that. Every step felt too loud. I was listening for movement, for another crash, for footsteps, for anything that would tell me someone was down there. Part of me thought maybe something had fallen naturally. Part of me thought maybe someone had broken in. And part of me already knew, from living in that house, that it might be something I would not be able to explain. When I reached the kitchen, I found the cat's feeder on the floor in the middle of the kitchen. It was about 6 feet away from where it had been sitting. That was not a small shift. It had not just tipped off the counter and landed near the base cabinets. It had moved. It was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, a good distance from its original spot in the corner of the counter. There were pieces of cat food scattered around it, but not as much as there should have been if it had fallen normally, bounced, spilled everywhere, and rolled. Most of the food was still inside the feeder. That made no sense. If gravity had done it, the feeder should have dropped downward near the counter. If it had hit something and bounced, it should have spilled more. If an animal had knocked it down, one of the animals would have been downstairs. But all of them had been in bed with me. The dogs were there. The cats were there. I knew where every animal was when the sound happened. The only way the feeder ended up where it did was if something moved it with force. That was the kind of thing people try to explain with earthquakes, especially in California. And yes, some things in that house could maybe be blamed on seismic activity. A small tremor can make objects shift, rattle, or fall. Doors can move. Items on shelves can slide. I understand that. Living in Southern California, you learn that not every unexplained movement is supernatural. But that feeder was not one of those things. An earthquake does not selectively throw a cat feeder from a corner of the counter into the middle of the kitchen while leaving most of the food inside. A tremor strong enough to launch it 6 feet should have moved other things too. I should have felt it. The animals would have reacted differently. There should have been some evidence of shaking. There was nothing like that. Just the feeder on the floor where it had no reason to be. That was one of the incidents I could never explain away. And there were many smaller things too. Objects would disappear and then reappear in different places, not once or twice, but repeatedly enough that it became part of life in that house. You would put something down, know exactly where you left it, then later, it would be gone. You would search everywhere, become frustrated, maybe blame yourself or someone else, then eventually the thing would show up somewhere else. Sometimes in a place you had already checked. Sometimes in a place that made no sense at all. That kind of thing can make you feel crazy. A missing object is easy to dismiss. Everyone misplaces things, but when it happens over and over in a house already full of footsteps, slamming doors, moving clothes, party sounds, and objects being thrown, it stops feeling like normal forgetfulness. It starts to feel like something is playing with you, or testing you, or reminding you that you are not fully in control of the space you live in. The house always had that feeling, not fully ours. We lived there, but it felt like something else had its own claim to the place. It did not happen every minute of every day, but it happened often enough that the house never felt completely safe. I could be doing something ordinary and suddenly hear a door slam or footsteps move across the raised foundation. I could walk past a closet and see clothes swaying. I could hear the soft sounds of a gathering downstairs when no one was there. I could find something missing, then later find it somewhere impossible. It wears on you after a while. People sometimes think haunting stories are exciting, like living in a spooky house would be an adventure. It is not. It becomes exhausting. You stop trusting your own senses. You stop relaxing fully. You listen too hard at night. You watch your pets for reactions. You hesitate before going downstairs. You check locked doors more than once. You tell yourself not to be afraid, but your body remembers every strange thing that has happened. And when something big happens, like the feeder incident, it confirms the fear you have been trying to deny. I can still picture the animals that night, the dogs barking but refusing to leave the bed, their hackles raised. The cats bolting behind the bed in panic. That reaction told me something before I even saw the kitchen. They knew the sound was not normal. If it had just been something falling, they might have been startled. But this was different. The dogs were defensive, but unwilling to go down. The cats wanted to hide. Animals do not care about ghost stories, and they do not understand human imagination. They react to what they sense, and what they sensed that night scared them. We did not stay in that house forever, but leaving was not easy. It took 1.5 years to sell the place and move out. That 1.5 years felt long. When you already want out of a house, every strange thing feels like one more reminder that you are trapped there until the sale goes through. You pack what you can, wait, hope, deal with buyers, paperwork, delays, and all the normal stress of selling a home. while still living in a place that does not feel right. I was more than ready to get out. By the time we finally moved, I did not feel nostalgic. I did not feel sad to leave. I felt relieved, deeply relieved. Some houses are hard to leave because they hold good memories. That house held something else. It held tension, fear, confusion, and too many events I could not explain. I wanted distance from it. I wanted to sleep somewhere that did not have invisible footsteps. I wanted doors to stay shut. I wanted objects to stay where I put them. I wanted my animals to stop reacting to things I could not see. Even now, I can think back to that house and feel the unease of it. Locked doors opening and slamming shut. Footsteps on the raised foundation. Clothes swaying in the closet like someone had brushed past them. The sound of a fancy party downstairs, low murmurs and clinking glasses drifting up from empty rooms. The cat's feeder somehow thrown from the kitchen counter into the middle of the floor, while every animal in the house was upstairs with me. Some of it, maybe, could be explained. A little seismic activity here. A draft there. An old house sound. A misplaced item. A tired mind. But not all of it. Not that feeder. Not the way the animals reacted. Not the repeated pattern of things disappearing and reappearing. Not the feeling of the place. I do not know what was in that house. Maybe it was residual energy, old memories repeating themselves, something attached to the land, or something that simply liked making itself known. Maybe it was not haunted in the way people imagine, with one clear ghost and one clear story. Maybe it was just a house where the boundaries felt thin, where sounds and movements from somewhere else slipped through now and then. Whatever it was, I am glad we left. It took 1.5 years to sell that place and move, but when we finally got out, I felt like I could breathe again. Some houses are just houses. Some houses feel alive in a warm way, and some houses feel like they are waiting for you to admit you hear them. That house in Southern California was one of those, and I have never missed it. The night after my mom died, and even though nothing dramatic happened, it has stayed with me more than almost anything else from that time. There were no moving objects, no voices, no shadow at the end of the bed, no figure standing clearly in the room. I did not see her with my eyes. I did not hear her speak. But I woke up from a dead sleep with the strongest feeling that she was there, standing over me, checking on me the way she used to when I was a kid. My mom had died the day before, so everything still felt raw and unreal. When someone that close to you dies, especially your mother, the world does not feel normal afterward. People tell you they are sorry, calls come in, messages arrive, arrangements have to be made, and life keeps demanding little tasks from you, when all you want is for everything to stop. The house feels wrong. Your own body feels wrong. You move through the day like you are awake, but part of you is somewhere else, still trying to understand that this person who has always existed in your life is suddenly gone. That night, I was exhausted. It was not regular tiredness. It was the kind of exhaustion that comes after grief has wrung you out. My mind was heavy, my chest felt hollow, and my whole body felt like it had been carrying something too heavy for too long. I went to sleep because there was nothing else to do. That is one of the strange things about grief. The worst thing has happened, and somehow, your body still needs sleep. The world can feel broken, but your body still shuts down because it cannot keep going. I am a very light sleeper. I always have been. I wake up easily, but there usually has to be some kind of actual stimulus. A sound in the room, a door closing, A change in light, someone walking nearby, a phone vibrating, something like that. I do not usually wake from deep sleep for no reason. If I wake suddenly, I usually know something caused it, even if I cannot identify it right away. But that night, I woke up from a dead sleep. Instantly, fully, not slowly drifting awake, not half dreaming, not lying there confused for a while before remembering where I was. I woke up suddenly with a clear sensation that someone was standing over me. And I knew it was my mom. I could not see her. The room was dark, and there was no visible figure there. But I did not need to see her to know what I was feeling. It was the same feeling I had gotten when I was a kid and she would come into my room at night to check on me. That is the best way I can describe it. It was not just a random presence. It was familiar. It had the emotional shape of her. When I was little, there were times when she would come check on me while I was sleeping. Maybe I was sick. Maybe she was worried. Maybe she was just being a mother. Sometimes kids half wake up when a parent comes into the room. You do not always open your eyes, but you know they are there. You feel them standing beside the bed. You sense their care before they even touch you. It is a quiet, safe feeling. The kind of feeling you do not fully appreciate until you are older and realize how much love was in those small moments. That was exactly what I felt that night. It felt like she was standing over me, looking down at me, making sure I was okay. Not in a scary way. Not in a way that felt unnatural or threatening. It felt like my mother. It felt like her concern, her love, her presence. It felt like she had come into my room one more time, not because she needed anything from me, but because she wanted to check on me after everything that had happened. And then, I smelled lavender. That was her favorite scent. The smell was clear. Not a vague idea of lavender. Not a memory of it. Not me thinking about it and then deciding I smelled it. It was there. I could smell it in the room. Lavender has such a specific softness to it. And because it was connected to her, it made the moment feel even more real. The second I noticed it, the feeling of her being there became stronger. It was like the scent confirmed what I already knew in my body. I lay there, awake, surrounded by that smell and that presence. I do not know how else to describe it, except to say that it was strong. Strong enough to wake me. Strong enough that I did not question it in the moment. Strong enough that I felt the room had changed. It was not empty anymore. Even though my eyes could not find her, I felt her there with a certainty that did not feel like imagination. That is what makes it so hard to explain to people who have not felt something like that. Saying I felt her presence can sound vague, like a metaphor or an emotional impression. But it did not feel vague at all. It felt as real as knowing someone is standing behind you before you turn around. It felt like my whole body recognized her before my mind could argue, and there was something deeply comforting about it. I had lost her. I knew she was gone. I knew I could not call her, touch her, hear her voice in the normal way, or go back to the life where she was still alive. But in that moment, it felt like she had not simply vanished. It felt like some part of her had come close enough for me to feel her, close enough to remind me that love does not disappear as cleanly as a body does. She was not there in a way I could prove, but she was there in a way I could feel. It seemed like she was checking on me. That was the exact feeling. She was not trying to frighten me. She was not trying to give me some big message. She was not asking me to follow her or pay attention to anything. She was just making sure I was okay. That was such a motherly thing to do that it almost hurt. Even after dying, if that is what this was, she came to see if I was all right. Then I felt an urge to go back to sleep. It was not like being forced. It was not frightening or controlling. It felt gentle, almost like the feeling a parent gives a child when they tuck them in and silently tell them it is okay to rest. I had woken up fully because of her presence, but once I understood, or once she had done whatever she came to do, I felt this calm pull back towards sleep. It was as if she was telling me, without words, that I did not need to be afraid, that I could rest, that she had checked on me, and now I should go back to sleep. So I did. That part still amazes me, because I am not someone who easily falls back asleep after waking suddenly. If something wakes me up, especially something strange or unsettling, I usually stay awake for a while. My mind starts going. I listen to the house. I try to figure out what caused it. I become alert, but that night, even though I had just woken from a dead sleep with the feeling of my dead mother standing over me, I did not panic. I did not get up and search the room. I did not turn on every light. I felt comforted, and then I went back to sleep. In the morning, the memory was still there. It was not like a dream that faded. I remembered waking up. I remembered the presence. I remembered the lavender. I remembered the feeling that she was checking on me. I remembered the calm urge to go back to sleep. It all stayed clear. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it had not felt like a dream at all. I have tried to explain it in normal ways. Of course I have. Grief is powerful. The mind can create sensations when it is overwhelmed. Maybe because she had just died, my brain was searching for her and created the feeling of her presence. Maybe I smelled lavender because memory and grief can trigger scent in a way that feels real. Maybe I woke up for some ordinary reason I did not notice, and because I was grieving, my mind immediately filled the room with her. Maybe it was my brain trying to comfort me during one of the hardest moments of my life. That is possible. But even if that is true, it does not make the experience feel any less meaningful. And honestly, it did not feel like my mind making something up. It felt like her. There is a difference I cannot fully put into words. Grief can make you wish for someone. It can make you think about them constantly. It can make memories come back with painful detail. But this was not me reaching for her. It felt like she reached for me. I was asleep, deeply asleep, and something woke me. Her presence was not weak or imagined. It was strong enough to pull me out of sleep completely. That is the part I keep coming back to. I am a light sleeper, yes, but I do not wake for nothing. Something has to disturb me. That night there was no sound I can remember. No movement, no visible person, no phone, no door, no noise outside. The stimulus was her. Her presence itself woke me up. That sounds impossible, but that is what it felt like. The lavender makes it even harder to dismiss. Scent is powerful, but it is also specific. If I had simply woken up sad and thought about my mom, that would be one thing. But waking up with her favorite scent in the room, along with the exact feeling of her standing over me the way she used to when I was a child, felt too personal, too complete. Like every part of the moment was arranged so I would know it was her. I do not claim to understand what happens after death. I do not know where people go or what remains. I do not know whether spirits can visit or whether love leaves some kind of imprint strong enough to reach us when we need it most. I do not know if the dead can check on the living. I do not know if my mother was truly there in some form, or if my own mind created the experience because I needed it. But I know how it felt. It felt like she came to me. It felt like she stood over me one last time, the way she did when I was little. It felt like lavender. It felt like love. And it felt like she was telling me I could sleep. That experience did not erase the grief. Nothing could. I still had to wake up into a world where she was gone. I still had to deal with the pain of missing her, the emptiness, the practical things that come after death, and the long process of learning how to live without someone who had always been part of my life. But that night gave me something I did not expect. It gave me the feeling that she had not left without checking on me. Maybe that was the last thing she needed to do. Maybe it was the last thing I needed from her. A mother checking on her child at night is such a simple act, but it carries so much love. It says, "I am here. You are safe. Go back to sleep." That is what I felt from her, even though she had died the day before. No words, no visible form, just presence, lavender, and the deep familiar comfort of knowing my mom was near. I still do not know how to explain it. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was something more. But I woke from a dead sleep because I felt her standing over me. I smelled her favorite lavender scent. I felt her presence so strongly that I knew it was her, even though I could not see her. And then I felt that gentle urge to go back to sleep, like she had only come to make sure I was okay. I do not know if I will ever be able to prove what happened that night, but in my heart, I believe my mom came to check on me one last time. After we got home from the hospital, I fell asleep and dreamed about my aunt. That is the simplest way to say it, but the dream has stayed with me for years because it did not feel like an ordinary dream. It felt like something final. It felt like a door opening for a few minutes, just long enough for me to understand that something was wrong, and then closing again forever. My aunt had just died. We had been at the hospital, and anyone who has gone through that kind of night knows how strange the world feels afterward. Hospitals have a way of making time lose its shape. You sit in waiting rooms under harsh lights, listening to machines, footsteps, nurses, doors opening and closing, people speaking softly, and you keep hoping for a different outcome, even when some part of you already knows what is coming. Then, when death actually happens, everything becomes quiet in a way that feels unreal. People cry, people hug, people make phone calls, but there is also this numb layer over everything. Your body keeps moving, but your mind feels far behind. By the time we got home, I was exhausted in a way that was more than just being tired. It was emotional exhaustion, the kind that sits deep in your bones. The house felt different when we walked in. Nothing had changed physically. The furniture was still where it always was. The walls were the same. The rooms looked normal. But when someone has just died, especially someone close to the family, normal things do not feel normal anymore. The silence feels bigger. The lights feel too bright or too dim. Even the air feels like it knows something has happened. I do not remember doing much after we got home. I think I was just running on emptiness by then. I was sad, confused, and drained from everything that had happened at the hospital. At some point, I lay down, and sleep took me quickly. It was not peaceful sleep. It was the kind your body forces on you because it cannot stay awake anymore, even if your mind is still full of grief. Then, the dream started. In the dream, I was aware of my aunt's window. I heard tapping. Not loud banging, not frantic pounding. Tapping, a small repeated sound against the glass, the kind of sound that makes you stop and listen, because it is deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like someone outside was trying to get attention without making too much noise. There was something careful about it, and that made it worse. It was not random. It was not rain. It was not a branch brushing the glass. In the dream, I knew someone was at the window. I moved toward it, already feeling uneasy. Dreams are strange because sometimes you know things without being told. I do not remember wondering where I was in the way I would in real life. I only remember the window, the tapping, and the feeling that I needed to look. The room around me felt dim, and the window seemed darker than it should have been, like the night outside was pressed right up against the glass. I looked out. My aunt was standing there. For a second, seeing her should have been comforting. She had just died, and there she was, standing outside the window. In another kind of dream, maybe she would have looked peaceful. Maybe she would have smiled. Maybe she would have said goodbye, or told me she was okay, or appeared in some warm light the way people sometimes describe after death dreams. But this was not like that. Her eyes were gone. That is the image I can never forget. She was my aunt, but not right. Her face was there, her shape was there, and I knew it was her. But where her eyes should have been, there was nothing. I do not mean they were closed. I do not mean they looked strange. They were gone. Empty, missing. It made her face feel hollow, like something had taken the part of her that made her fully herself. She stood outside the window and asked me to let her in. She said she was locked out. Her voice, or the feeling of her voice, was enough to make the dream feel even more real. She sounded like she needed help. She was outside, tapping at the window, asking to come inside because she could not get in. It was such a simple request, and in any normal situation, if someone you loved was outside asking to be let in, you would open the door or the window without thinking. But in the dream, I knew I could not. Because she had just died. I told her that. I said she could not come in. I told her she had just died. That moment felt important, like I was not just refusing her, but recognizing something I was supposed to recognize. She looked like my aunt, sounded like my aunt, and was asking for help. But I knew that letting her in was wrong. I did not understand all the rules, but I understood that one. She did not belong inside anymore. She could not come back in like nothing had happened. Death had changed something, and even in the dream I knew it. She did not argue. That is another part that stays with me. She did not scream. She did not beg harder. She did not pound on the window or become angry. She simply turned and walked away. I watched her go. There was something deeply sad about that, but also frightening. The way she accepted it made the dream feel less like my mind inventing a scary scene and more like some kind of exchange. She asked to be let in. I told her she could not come in because she had died. Then she left. It was as if that was all she needed to hear, or all she was allowed to do. Then the dream ended. When I woke up, I had that heavy feeling dreams can leave behind when they are too vivid. For a few seconds, the room around me did not feel fully separate from the dream. I could still remember the tapping. I could still see her standing outside the window. I could still see the place where her eyes should have been. I could still hear her saying she was locked out. And I remembered telling her no. That was the part that made me feel strange afterward. I had loved her, and I had refused to let her in. But in the dream, it had not felt cruel. It had felt necessary. I was not rejecting her. I was protecting something. Maybe myself, maybe the house, maybe the boundary between life and death. I do not know. I only know that I felt certain she had just died. And because of that, she could not come inside. I have thought about what the dream might have meant. Maybe it was just grief. That is the most reasonable explanation. We had come home from the hospital after her death, and my mind was trying to process the shock. A dream about her being locked out could have been my brain's way of understanding that she was gone and could not return to the world of the living. The missing eyes might have represented death, or the fear of seeing someone you love changed by it. Maybe I was telling myself, in dream language, that she had crossed a line and could not come back. That could be all it was, but it did not feel like an ordinary grief dream. The timing was too close. The dream happened right after coming home from the hospital. I had not spent weeks thinking about her death or building up complicated dream images over time. It happened immediately, when the grief was still fresh and raw, before my mind had even fully accepted the loss. It felt like she came to the window because she was still near, still confused, still looking for a way back inside. And the fact that I never dreamed about her again makes it feel even stranger. If it had only been grief, I might expect more dreams. Maybe dreams of her alive, dreams of the hospital, dreams of conversations we never got to have. But there was only that one dream, right after she died. One tapping at the window, one request to come in, one refusal. Then nothing ever again. That makes the dream feel final. Sometimes I wonder if she was truly locked out in some way. Not locked out of the house, exactly, but locked out of life. Maybe she did not understand right away that she had died. Maybe some part of her came back to a familiar place, trying to get in, trying to return to what she knew. And maybe, because I was asleep and vulnerable to that kind of thing, I was the one who heard the tapping. Maybe that sounds too supernatural. Maybe it is only how grief turns dreams into stories. But I cannot shake the feeling that the dream had a purpose. It was not random. It was not full of the strange nonsense dreams usually have. It was direct. There was tapping. I looked out. She was there. Her eyes were gone. She asked to be let in. I told her she could not come in because she had just died. She turned and walked away. That was it. No extra scene. No confusing changes. No dream logic twisting it into something else. It was almost too simple, and that simplicity is what makes it feel real to me. It felt like a moment, not a story my brain invented for entertainment. It felt like I had been placed in a position where I had to answer her, and somehow I knew the right answer. I still think about her eyes being gone. That image is the most disturbing part because eyes carry so much of who a person is. When you look at someone you love, you recognize them through their eyes. Their mood, their humor, their sadness, their warmth. All of it lives there. Seeing her without them made her feel like my aunt and not my aunt at the same time. Her body or image had come to the window, but something essential was missing. Maybe that was how my mind showed death. The body can still look familiar, but the person is not inside it the same way. Or maybe whatever stood at the window was only wearing the shape of my aunt. I do not like that thought. But it has crossed my mind. The dream did not feel evil exactly, but it did feel wrong. Her asking to come in felt like something I should not allow. If it had truly been only my aunt, why would I feel so strongly that she could not enter? Why would her eyes be gone? Why would she turn away so quietly when I told her she had died? I do not know. What I do know is that I woke up with the feeling that something had been settled. Not peacefully, but finally. My aunt was gone. She could not come back into the house, into life, or into the place she had left. Whether the dream came from my own grief or from something beyond it, it carried the same message. She had died. She was locked out. And I could not let her in. I never dreamed about her again after that. Not once. Sometimes I wish I had, because a kinder dream might have softened that memory. I would have liked to see her healthy, smiling, or at peace. I would have liked a goodbye that did not involve tapping on a window and empty eyes. But maybe that was the only dream I was meant to have. Maybe it was not meant to comfort me. Maybe it was meant to show me that death is a boundary, and once someone crosses it, even love cannot open the window. I still remember that dream clearly. Coming home from the hospital, falling asleep from grief and exhaustion, hearing the tapping at her window, and seeing my aunt outside with no eyes. I remember her asking me to let her in because she was locked out. I remember telling her she could not come in because she had just died. And I remember her turning away and walking off into whatever waited beyond the glass. After that, she never came back to my dreams. And maybe that is what scares me most.